Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and I am also a doctoral student of psychology. Today, we're going to talk about what loneliness does to your brain, and I'm going to have this video in two parts. The one after this, we're going to talk about how you can resolve some of these issues. And today, we're going to actually talk about the features, what loneliness is, the features of loneliness, and then what it does to your brain. The research is going to be in the description box, but the video that's coming after this will talk about the risk factors, like who is at greater risk for loneliness, as well as how to resolve those things so that this is not something that impacts you. So, what is loneliness? Based on research, loneliness is a subjective psychological state that occurs when the individual themselves perceives a gap between the social relationships that they desire versus those that they actually want to, the ones that they actually experience. So the ones they desire versus the ones they actually experience based on their perception. It's not defined by the number of social contexts. However, it's not necessarily about the social contacts, the frequency, but the fact that those relationships feel meaningful, supportive, and emotionally satisfying. So it's not the number of people, but it's the quality that really does affect and define loneliness based on that subjective psychological state. So what are the key features of loneliness? Typically, we had mentioned subjectiveness, the loneliness based on the personal perception, not the objective isolation. The next one is relational, actually. As we'd mentioned earlier, it does reflect the dissatisfaction with the quality or closeness of these relationships or the amount. The next one is emotionally distressing. This one is a feature of loneliness that is not necessarily a feature of those that are in isolation, right? Some people do not feel this way, and that's why they say, I'm not lonely, I'm alone. This one is one of those features. Loneliness is associated with sadness, emptiness, and social pain. So reaction to the lack of social experiences. It's very specific to the social experiences. You're not feeling sad because your dog is getting older. That's a very reasonable reason to feel sad, but it's not the emotional distress related to lack of social interactions or quality of social interactions. Even if that social experience with your dog that one's a little different because you might actually be experiencing, if that's the only social relationship you have, that might be. But maybe you're feeling sad about something that doesn't have to do with social relationships. That one is different than completely defining based on social relationships. Does that make sense? I probably didn't explain it that well because some people might feel sad about their dog passing and it doesn't have to do with loneliness, but just the connection and the love they feel, even if they feel fulfilled in their social life, but they still love their dog. So that's what I meant. But if that's if you're also experiencing loneliness in conjunction with that, that one might be. Now, the next one is distinct from social isolation. We already touched on this. Social isolation refers to actually the literal lack of objective contacts, like objective lack of contacts in your life. So if you don't really have anybody. An example could be folks that live alone. They're living alone and they're likely doing a lot of things alone, but they might not feel lonely. The next one is the last one, but I think it's very important. Motivational signaling occurs. That this is part of why loneliness actually occurs in general. Evolutionary models does describe loneliness as a signal, to be honest, that motivates individuals to reconnect socially. It's actually part of why we have this. It's similar to hunger signals for food. And so that is why I think that's a good stopping point that we can start going into the actual experiences of what loneliness actually does to your brain and your experiences in your life. The first one is that heightened threat response. As we just discussed, there's a reason that we have these components and mechanisms within ourselves so that we can be motivated to connect with others. So this signal is when people feel lonely, the brain does signal that social isolation as a threat. There's a section in our brain, the amygdala, but it doesn't really matter. It's basically the center where this area tends to be activated when individuals feel fear or danger, and it increases that activity in social isolation. Because of that, the symptom of that creates a symptom of anxiety and vigilance, even around others. And that makes social signals appear more negative and less rewarding, which we're going to talk about later in the video. The next one is altered thoughts when you are resting, when your brain is not activating, you still have these altered thoughts because loneliness affects that default mode actually. And what ends up happening is you have more negative self-reflection and rumination, particularly tied to your interactions or perceptions from other people. That just means that you have more negative thoughts and you have less effective or efficient social processing. So you perceive things a little bit more negatively because of that. The next one is your reward system might be a little bit, the word I want to use is blunt because that's how I'm perceiving it. But it's just that the social connection normally, it activates pathways that makes interactions feel pleasurable. Okay, so that's like a normal response. When people are struggling with chronic loneliness, they may reduce that responsiveness within those reward circuits. And then it makes people who are experiencing chronic loneliness in general, these social experiences are actually less rewarding and then they may withdraw further. So it's just that the pathways are not as familiar and they are experiencing these things negatively now or a little bit more hypervigilant. And so therefore, it's not as positive as someone who doesn't experience chronic loneliness. The next one is stress hormone dysregulation. So in other words, loneliness actually does, like chronic loneliness, activates the HPA axis, which basically, in short, just elevates cortisol. And so long-term cortisol can impair memory formation and emotional regulation. And so because of that, we can see that there is a connection between your stress level and chronic loneliness. And the next one is that you may have slower cognitive improvement over time. And I know some of these can be a little bit distressing, but as I've mentioned, I'm going to make a video, which is going to come after this, how to resolve some of these things. These are not permanent. These are not permanent, okay? We refer to the brain being plastic, where you can adjust these things so that nothing of these sorts are permanent. We just have to reframe and readjust things, and usually our brain does the rest, okay? And so slower cognitive improvement over time. So there was a study basically, and it was a very long study, and you can see it. It's in the description box. It does find that individuals who are chronically lonely are associated with less improvement in cognitive tasks over 2 years, specifically 2 years, which is the research, but we can apply that to other years in comparison to their peers that are not lonely. And the last one is an increased risk of developing dementia. So loneliness is repeatedly identified as a risk factor, okay? And it's possible due to that cognitive engagement I mentioned, as well as lower cognitive reserve, which we're going to touch on in the next video. So the research is in the description box. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. It's not to discourage anybody. It's just for informational purposes. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.